We're going to be talking about Platinum Age books and CGC counts. We're going to take a look at the books from 1935 that have been most submitted to CGC. There are a lot of famous books on the list, but you probably haven't heard of them. How's that? Let's take a look up next on this video from Bronzeville Comics. Hello, panelologists. This is Jim from Bronzeville Comics coming to you with another video. Before we get started, please like, comment, subscribe. Check out the description of this video for my eBay store, my email, my whatnot, and my Instagram. All that's in the description. We're just going to jump right into this. So this is the second of a multi-part series that I plan to do pretty much every Thursday, going year by year through the top books that have been most submitted to CGC each year. Now, just for simplicity's sake, I'm only going to stick with blue labels. CGC Data is a great website. That's where I'm getting the information from. Last week, we did books from 1934 and earlier. There's some really interesting books on there. And as a matter of fact, no, I'm going to hold off on that. I'm going to do a very special episode on a book I picked up from the Platinum Age. So let's take a look. We're going to count down the top 10. We're going to talk about some other books on this list as well. And about what they're worth and what their significance may be. So let's start at number 10. And number 10 is Famous Funnies number 17. I said there would be a lot of famous books on this list. And this is one of them. Famous Funnies 17. Famous Funnies was essentially the first monthly comic book out on the market. Later issues expanded to different genres, and including some of those great Frank Frazetta covers, like in the 210 range in terms of issue number. This one is a Christmas cover. It's from the end of the year. It's the December issue, and it has the characters that we see inside. Now, these characters have not really survived over time. They're long forgotten to history, and but we will touch on some of them as the cover does highlight, subsequent covers do highlight them. There are 13 of these on the Census, and in July, a 3.5 sold for $130. So low-grade copies are somewhat affordable of these books, and it might be tempting to get something that is there from 1935. Let's take a look at number 9 on the list. Actually, there's a tie for 8th. So we're going to go to Famous Funnies number 11. This is also Eastern Color Publishing. There are 13 of these on the Census. Actually, this is equal 9th with the other one. A 5.0 sold in March for $720. So as you get up, it gets a little more expensive as you get into mid-grade for these books. This trapeze cover. It says 100 Color Comics, but I'm pretty sure that that this was a book that was 68 pages, 64 interior pages plus the cover. And you'll see in this issue, it lists some of the characters: Dan Dunn, Dixie Dugan, Above the Crowd, Nipper, Napoleon, and Buck Rogers, and many others. So Buck Rogers has survived the test of time. I'm not exactly sure who these characters are or exactly what this dude on the left has on his butt. I guess that's part of his trapeze outfit. Oh, anyway, let's move on to number 8. And it is a copy of Famous Funnies number 14. This has 15 copies on the Census. A 2.5 in June sold for $275. So again, low grade, you're going to have to spend a couple $100. And it says we have Buck Rogers and Joe Palooka as amongst the characters. And again, I'm not exactly sure who this character on the cover is. I haven't read any of these old Famous Funnies, and there are some characters I'm familiar with. He is not one of them. Let's keep moving on, though. There is a three-way tie for fifth. And one of these, and this is maybe getting a bit redundant, Famous Funnies number 15. There are 16 copies of this on the Census. A 5.0 of this sold in July for $188. And this football cover, it lists a lot of the same characters on the cover. You know, Joe Palumbo and Nipper. There's Seaweed Sam, Dan Dunn, Buck Rogers. And again, I'm not sure. Is that... I don't think that's Joe Palumbo, but it could be. Joe Palumbo is more of a boxer. Is this him? I'm not sure. But it says here, like, it's the nation's comic monthly. And at this point in time, and this is why it's dominating the list, it was really the only monthly comic book that was coming out on newsstands. And these reprinted newspaper strips. Now, I believe a lot of them were the daily strips, so the old newspaper comic strips. There'd be a page or maybe multiple pages in the daily newspaper that would print just a strip, usually 3 or 4 panels, Monday through either Friday or Saturday. And then on Sunday, you got the color, which was an expanded format. So I think in some of these, they did color some of the weekly strips. Correct me if I'm wrong. I'm not a huge expert on Platinum era comic books that were reprints. So, again, 16 of these on the Census, and it's also equal to another book that that also has 16 copies on the Census, but I did not include this in the top 10 because it is a pulp. And pulps have only been graded recently, and we already see this is Weird Tales number 140. The cover by Margaret Brundage, Jack Binder art. And again, we see some of the authors there. No incredibly famous authors or characters in here. And I include the pulps because they're interesting. Now, the pulps, there are probably just more of them out there. There's some of them, they're more collectible in this era than the comic books because essentially you're mostly looking at Famous Funnies. That being said, let's go to another book that's tied for 5th place. And that is here, Famous Funnies number 9. There are 16 copies on the Census. A 7.5 of this sold last year for $2,520. You see, I think this is Hairbreadth Harry sitting here being painted over on the park bench. I'm not sure. Is he a magician or just a well-to-do gentleman about town? I think he might be the latter. There's a Barnacle Bill in here. Mescal Ike. Again, really, Jane Arden. You know, Buck Rogers is the most, the most popular character in terms of what we can still connect to in the modern age. Let's go to another book that's tied, and this is Famous Funnies number 6, 16 copies on the Census. A 5.0 sold in March for $1,080, and this is the first ever New Year's cover. You see down in the lower right-hand corner here, it's January 1935. And they're ready for the clock to strike 12. It's the first time a Nation's Comic Monthly logo appeared below the Famous Funnies title. Victor Panzmino cover. Again, not really familiar with these characters. And maybe at some point I'll do a deeper dive with some research into them. But, you know, again, most of these folks forgotten to history, and somebody's about to get hit on the head with a rolling pin. That should be hilarious. Now, for a little bit of a change of pace, we're going to move to number 4 on the list. This is a character you all know. Mickey Mouse Magazine number 2. Now, this is magazine-sized. This is from October 1935, and there are 17 copies on the Census. 7.0, I'm not sure if it's this one or another one. A 7.0 sold in April for $3,360. It's Mickey Mouse number 2. And, you know, Mickey Mouse is still a very well-known character today. I mean, one of the most well-known fictional characters in the world. And so he was, I mean, to describe the enormity of Mickey Mouse in 1935, his cartoons that were coming out in theaters as shorts before the feature film were in some ways more popular than most of the feature films. They were done in Technicolor, where most full-length feature films in 1935 were still in black and white because Disney had an exclusive contract with Technicolor to use their 3-strip process. Up until I think it was maybe even 1936. Then you started to see more color films. You did see Snow White in 37, which is a color film. And then there were some color films here and there in Technicolor. And then like 1938, Adventures of Robin Hood, 1939, Wizard of Oz, Gone with the Wind. And Technicolor became more and more commonplace. But Mickey Mouse was an enormous star in 1935. Let's go to number 3 on the list. And we have Famous Funnies number 12. There are 18 copies of this on the Census, and back in 2020, a 6.0 sold for $238. Again, down here, they do have goofy gags. For thrills, Above the Crowd, Buck Rogers, and Flying to Fame. For laughs, for mystery, Connie is one of the mystery things. And, I mean, hilarity is going to ensue when a kid puts a stick of dynamite under Dad's chair. That is just... again, I'm not sure who these characters are. Is that Mescal Ike? I don't know. If you have more information, feel free to leave that in the comments. I just am researching the titles. Let's go, and this list is a little redundant. Let's go to number 2 on the list, and it's Famous Funnies number 10. Starting in this issue, Queenie and Pee-wee. Queenie is typifying the wit of the new generation, and Pee-wee is a youngster wise beyond his years. And we have Flying to the Flame in this issue, and Strange as It Seems. So I probably have a great variety in these books. This issue number 10 has 19 copies on the Census, and last year 4.5 sold for $528, just to give you a source of comparison. And let's go to number 1 on the list. Take a wild guess. Take a wild guess at what number 1 is. It's Famous Funnies number 8. 20 copies on the Census. Last year, 7.0 sold for $1,980. And there's not much more to say about Famous Funnies. This was the book of the time. There wasn't much else to choose from. And 12 issues came out in 1935, and 9 of those 12 made this list. What did not make the list? I'm going to point to 2 comics, because 1935 was the first year of DC Comics. And just missing the list, and there should be like an asterisk here, is New Comics number 1. This is the title that eventually became Adventure Comics. So continued into the early 1980s. Shelley Mayer, Walt Kelly, Whitney Ellsworth, all contributing art to the book. There are 11 copies on the Census, and a 1.0 in June sold for $4,320. So this is an expensive book. It's that DC connection, right? Now, this came out, you see it says it's a December book. It came out in late 1935. And I said this as an asterisk. 11 copies on the Census, Blue Label. There are also 11 restored copies on the Census. The fact that this is much more valuable, the Famous Funnies you're probably not going to conserve or restore just because they don't have a tremendous amount of value. But this book does, and we're going to see that in the Golden Age. I'm going to stick with Blue Label, but in certain cases we'll talk about the restored copies. And I just think that this is kind of an aberration for 1935. As we get into next week, 1936, I promise the list is going to be a little more varied and more interesting as more publishers started putting comic book material out. But New Comics, much like Famous Funnies, were reprints of newspaper strips. But this was not the first DC comic. The first DC comic is New Fun Comics, number 1, from February of 1935. And there are 0 copies of this in the CGC census. And that's a very simple reason. It is too big to be encapsulated. This is larger than a treasury size. It is 10 inches wide, about 15 inches high. So I believe it's even larger than a Life magazine. So there's no slab that's going to hold this. And this is these New Fun Comics. This eventually became More Fun Comics. The run that had the first appearances of Spectre, Dr. Fate, Green Arrow, Aquaman, Superboy, Johnny Quick. But here, again, Jack Woods. I mean, the cover is a newspaper strip. And I'm not sure if this is a Sunday strip or a compilation of weekday strips. I'm going to guess it's a Sunday strip, but I could be wrong. And you can see down here, new comic strips, aircraft, radio, movies, stories, adventure, mystery, sports, prize. And it looks like this particular copy down there in prize, it looks like Color Touch. But what does it really matter? Because CGC is not grading this stuff. You just got to... But this doesn't sell too often. There are some that, Heritage sales. In 2012, a very good minus copy sold for $6,572.50. That's 12 years ago. This is a coveted book just because it is number one. It's the first ever. And I'm pretty certain this is issue number one. Let me just double check. Yes. Now, interestingly, there's a good copy. This is the copy in question. A good copy that is on sale. It's at right now at $420 with buyer's premium, but it has about 14 days to go. Overstreet has a good 2.0 value at $7,400. This is from the Christine Farrell Complete DC Collection. A piece is missing from the back cover. The cover and all wraps are detached, and there are no staples. So it's in a bad shape, but it's such a unique book. I think it's definitely going to go for... I'm going to say this is going to go for $10,000 or more. I'm going to say over $10,000. I don't know if anybody out there is kind of an expert on this kind of thing. It's not a graded book, so a lot of people don't really focus on it as much, but it is a unique piece of comic book history. And of course, DC Comics, putting their birth date back to 1935. 50 years later, 1985 was the first, was the Crisis on Infinite Earths, DC's 50th anniversary. So those are the most submitted books from 1935. Okay. A bit of an interesting year. Still Platinum Age. Famous Funnies was the only monthly title that was coming out that is comic book size. Even the Mickey Mouse magazine is magazine size. The New Fun Comics is like tabloid size, essentially. And it wasn't until December of that year that New Comics #1 came out. Please tune in again next week. I mean, this is going to be a little bit slow going, but I'm going to stick to it. And I know I did get some positive feedback from folks. Thank you for the people who left comments last time about this. It's kind of interesting to see the Platinum Age of comics. I did pick up one of the books from the list from last week. I am not really... am I going to do that for every list? I don't think so. Because these books are going to get more and more expensive as we get into the superhero era of the Golden Age in 1938, and then especially in 1940 as things are exploding. Would I like to have a copy of New Fun #1? Probably. I do have the famous first edition that DC put out, and that will probably have to satisfy me for now because it's not going to be at the top of my list. So again, thank you for stopping by. We're going to be continuing this week by week. Let me know in the comments below what you think about this series and what you think about these books. We will have more variety, I promise you, going forward. In the meantime, you can take a look at a couple of my other videos here. And this is Jim saying until next time, enjoy your comics.